Can you hear me in the back? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, I first want to thank the organizers and the hosts, and especially Radoslav for inviting me to what has been an extremely inspiring day. And I'm very sorry to pause the discussion. But today I will give a brief overview of an ongoing research on Bulgarian architectural exports to post-colonial markets during the Cold War. The presentation will give a glimpse into the contribution of Bulgarian architects, engineers and construction workers to architectural production and more generally urbanization processes in Africa and the Middle East between the 1960s and 1990s. In this first part of the presentation, I would like to suggest that the totalitarian heritage of Bulgaria and other Eastern Bloc, former Eastern Bloc countries could also be examined as part of a larger network of socialist cooperation and exchange of architectural knowledge and resources. As a result, the narrative of the architectural production becomes as valuable as the architectural qualities of a single building as an object per se. In an attempt to provide different interpretations of this narrative, another key focus will be the process of collecting materials. I had a similar problem as Sanya, finding information about it. And I also wanted to mention that the research wasn't carried out in a specific academic degree. It was a self-directed project which evolved from my interest as a student in global urbanism and continued after completing my studies at Manchester School of Architecture. I therefore had the freedom to explore more engaging ways of documentation, knowledge sharing, and presentation of buildings of the 20th century. And the process itself and involved actors became as important as the final synthesis of information. And in the end, I will present the outcome of the research work until now. Following a 2-year process of gathering materials in collaboration with students and universities in 2015, with the help of numerous volunteers, which you can see here, colleagues and partners, a series of engaging cultural events on the topic were initiated. It included exhibitions, workshops, and students and discussions with key actors involved in the study. But first, let's have a look at how the export of architecture and urbanism started, how it was initiated, and why it could be relevant for today's discussion. The concept of the Third World was introduced in the early 50s in order to map countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America as states uninvolved in the East-West competition. However, as we know, they very soon became important actors in the global Cold War. Military, economic, and technological modernization were their essential means in this confrontation. And both sides, the United States as the First World and the Second World, the Soviet Union, both allocated significant resources in modernization programs in Africa and the Middle East to their allies or opponents of their opponents. Architecture at the same time represented, mediated and conveyed these modernization efforts, but also provided visible proof of geopolitical alliances. In the export of design and construction services from Bulgaria to newly founded post-colonial countries was introduced when the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance was created. At this time, architectural and planning practice in Bulgaria was primarily organized in the state planning offices, which we talked about a little bit. They acted as general planners, specializing in specific building typologies. Competing with international specialists, Bulgarian architecture firms proved themselves as valued professional practices through the realization of projects in over 35 countries. They first started with construction of military and strategic objects such as airports, irrigation systems, silos, and infrastructure facilities. These commissions were the prelude for engagement in the field of architecture, and activities very soon expanded in many countries, as we can see, over 35. I will mostly focus on one state firm, Technoexportstroj, as one of the biggest contractors of workers, which also contributed immensely to the welfare of the state. As you can see here, they're praised for that. They completed over 650 projects and delivered over 900 designs. Amongst them, there were prestigious and highly visible projects of different types and scales: industrial, roads, health infrastructure, but mostly governmental buildings. They were praised for their high-quality designs, but also a lot cheaper than Western competitors. They also adapted to the financial and technological regimes where they planned for. This is one of the first and most notable projects abroad, which expressed the modernist approach of many of the Bulgarian architects. This is the Olympic Sports Complex in Tunis, and many of the architects involved in the project, like Evgeny Zidarov and Kanu Dundakov, they assumed important positions in Bulgarian architecture afterwards. Following this engagement in sports architecture, many others followed, including complexes in Nigeria and 15 youth centers in Libya. In Libya, they also, many of the architects and engineers, they were involved in building the country's health infrastructure. As we can see, they constructed typologies of different hospitals in various cities. Actually, I don't even know how many cities they were involved in. In the Arab Emirates, they won bids in the international competition against other, mainly Western colleagues. This is the bus terminal in Abu Dhabi. Sorry, I have to put it down, I guess. In Abu Dhabi, which still stands amongst skyscrapers and also raises the topic of preserving architectural heritage in this context. This is a collage done by architectural students in Manchester during a collaborative workshop, and it represents the Technoexportstroj city, since they were involved in all scales and types of projects, basically produced all the elements of a city. Data was also acquired through interviews and informal conversations with nearly 40 architects and engineers involved in the scientific technical exchange. Their personal stories, objects, memories, diaries, and documents of this period became essential for the understanding of the competing networks of political and economic influence intersecting in Africa and later in the Middle East. Here are some of them. I'll cut their stories shortly, unfortunately. But here, one of the building engineer's personal archive and the communication with his relatives gave an insight into the construction processes and deadlines of one of the most highly praised projects designed by Bulgarians. Oh no. Sorry about that.
Technical issues that do happen.
Sorry, I lost it. Okay. So this is the National Theatre in Lagos, designed by Stefan Kochev, and it's a copy of the Varna Sports Center hall, which some of you probably know.
It's not the other way around. We did not know.
No, we do know because they were the architect was invited to work in Nigeria after. Yeah.
Because there was a German artist, who worked on both objects, but he did not know who was the copy and what was the original.
Okay, could be. It was constructed in an extremely short time for the Festival of Black African Art and Culture, and was recently rehabilitated into a cinema hall and was saved by activists because it was threatened to be bought by commercial developers from the United Arab Emirates. I try to keep it short. Yeah. So the personal contact with these architects was extremely valuable for me as a recent graduate. And I realized that in order to invite the wider public to give interpretations to totalitarian heritage, we need to share stories that are relatable rather than building details and talk about the technicalities. In an attempt to introduce to engage more architects and students of the coming generation, a key initiative within the project was a digital fabrication workshop, during which students from the Sofia architecture schools met up with some of the architects who were involved in the export of architecture, interviewed them, and afterwards they produced 3D models and 3D printed models afterwards, which were then presented in another series of exhibitions actually, which was the aim of it was to become a platform at which both architects could, these architects could be praised, but also share their knowledge with students and with the wider public. Because I think that we're all interested here in totalitarian heritage, but it should expand to other people who are not interested in order to get more interpretations. Down. Okay, but to sum up, it's a topic that's been widely presented now, but also really understudied, and it could give us an overview of the global networks in this time. And the second key point I want to finish with, which I already enhanced a couple of times, was indeed to invite more people in these discussions. Is that okay?
Well, yeah. Thank you, Elena, very much.